Captain Lee Dae-ho stood in the smoking ruins of what used to be New Seoul's main defense tower. The metal was twisted like paper, and strange purple crystals grew from the walls. 3 months ago, this place had been full of life and hope. Now, it looked like Hell. The Devourers had come without warning. Nobody knew where they came from, or what they really wanted. They just appeared in space one day and started eating planets. Not just the people or the buildings. They ate everything. They turned whole worlds into weird crystal gardens that hurt to look at. Lee kicked a piece of broken concrete. His uniform was dirty and torn. He had not slept properly in weeks. Earth's colonies were falling one by one. Mars was gone. Europa was gone. Titan was covered in those awful crystals. Only a few worlds were left, and they would not last long. His communication device buzzed. The message was short and impossible to believe. The Galactic Council wanted to meet with human leaders. The same council that had refused to let humans join for 50 years. The same aliens who called humans primitive and barely civilized. Now they wanted to talk. 2 days later, Lee found himself on a transport ship heading to the Nexus Eternal. It was the biggest space station he had ever seen. The thing was so large that Earth could fit inside it 3 times. As his small human ship got closer, Lee felt very small. The docking bay was enormous. Ships from dozens of different worlds sat in neat rows. Some looked like giant insects made of metal. Others were balls of light that floated without engines. A few looked like buildings that someone had taught to fly. Lee's human transport looked like a toy next to them. The welcoming committee was waiting when Lee stepped off his ship. He recognized some of the species from the database. The tall, scaly one with 4 arms was a Kraxan. The floating ball of energy was a Luminar. The insect-like creature with too many legs was a Zephyrite. None of them looked happy to see him. "So this is what humans look like up close," said the Kraxan in a voice like grinding rocks. His translator made the word sound bored. "Smaller than I expected." The Luminar's light pulsed in patterns. "We have seen the combat reports. Your species has lost 80% of your colonies in 3 months. Perhaps we should reconsider this alliance." Lee kept his face calm, but his hands wanted to make fists. These aliens had watched humans die for months without helping. Now they acted like humanity was the problem. A new voice spoke from behind the group. "The humans are here because they are still fighting. That is more than some species can say." The speaker was another Kraxan, but different from the first. This one had scars across his face and arms. His weapons looked used, not polished for show. When he looked at Lee, there was something that might have been respect in his yellow eyes. "I am Vexthul," the scarred Kraxan said. "I command the 7th Strike Fleet." "Captain Lee Dae-ho," Lee replied. "Earth Defense Force." "Earth Defense Force," repeated the first Kraxan, with a sound that might have been laughter. "Defending. What, exactly? Your homeworld will be crystal in a month." Lee felt his temper rise, but before he could speak, another human voice cut through the air. "Maybe we should focus on the mission instead of measuring who lost what." Commander Park So-min walked up the ramp from the transport. She was smaller than Lee and looked young, but her eyes were sharp and cold. The aliens turned to look at her with surprise. Another human. The insect-like Zephyrite clicked its mandibles. "How many of you are there?" "Enough," Park said simply. She carried a data pad that glowed with information. "I have analysis of devourer attack patterns from the last 3 months. Would you like to see why your previous strategies failed?" The floating Luminar pulsed brighter. "You dare to suggest that I suggest nothing," Park interrupted. "I state facts." She touched her datapad, and a hologram appeared in the air. It showed star maps with red marks where worlds had fallen. You tried to fight them with honor. You used formation attacks and noble tactics. They ate your fleets. The hologram changed to show human battle reports. The fights looked messy and desperate. Ships crashed into enemies instead of fighting at distance. Soldiers used explosives in ways that made no sense. Everything looked wrong and chaotic. But somehow, Park continued, humans lasted longer on every world they attacked. Want to know why? The aliens were quiet now. Even the arrogant Kraxen was paying attention. Because we fight dirty, Park said. Because we do not care about honor when our families are dying. Because we break every rule if it means staying alive one more day. Vexthal made a sound that might have been approval. Interesting. Show us more. For the next hour, Park displayed human tactics that made the aliens uncomfortable. Soldiers who pretended to retreat and then attacked from behind. Ships that rammed into enemies while exploding. Weapons made from farming tools and mining equipment. This is not warfare, the insect commander said with disgust. This is barbarism. This is survival, Lee said quietly. And it works. The meeting. Room fell silent. Outside the windows, Lee could see more ships arriving. The fleet was gathering, but nobody seemed confident about their chances. Finally, the Luminer spoke. The target is Kepler 442b. The Devourers have been there for 2 weeks. We believe they are building something important. What kind of something? Park asked. We do not know. Our scouts do not return. Lee looked at the star charts. Kepler 442b was a mining world, nothing special. But if the Devourers were building something there, it had to be stopped. When do we leave? He asked. Vexthal showed his teeth in what might have been a smile. Tomorrow. Try not to embarrass yourselves, humans. Lee smiled back. We will try not to embarrass you either. As the meeting ended and the aliens filed out, Park moved closer to Lee. They think we are weak, she whispered. Good, Lee replied. Let them keep thinking that. It will make things easier when we show them what humans can really do. Outside, the fleet continued to grow. Ships from 100 worlds gathered for a mission that everyone knew was desperate. But for the first time in months, Lee felt something that might have been hope. The Devourers had never fought humans and aliens working together. They had never faced the kind of chaos that humans could bring to a battle. Maybe it was time to teach them both some new lessons. Kepler 442b did not look like a planet anymore. From space, it looked like someone had covered a world with broken glass that changed colors every few seconds. Purple crystals grew in impossible shapes that hurt to look at directly. Sometimes, parts of the planet seemed to disappear completely, then came back a few seconds later. Sergeant Kim Tae-wook checked his weapon for the 10th time. He was crammed into a dropship with 5 other humans and 8 Kraxen warriors. The aliens were twice as big as the humans and covered in natural armor that looked like metal scales. Their weapons could probably level a building. First time. Working with humans? Kim asked the Kraxen sitting next to him. The alien looked down at Kim like he was examining a bug. I have heard stories. Your species dies quickly in real combat. Kim nodded. We die a lot, but we get back up. The Kraxen made a sound that might have been laughter. The dead do not get back up, small human. You have not met enough humans yet, Kim replied. The dropship shook as they entered the atmosphere. Through the window, Kim could see the crystal. Formations growing larger. Some of them were taller than mountains and seemed to bend space around them. Other ships in the assault force began to disappear and reappear in different places. What is happening? One of the younger humans asked. The crystals mess with reality, explained Dr. Choi Hai-jin from her seat near the medical supplies. They make space work differently. Our instruments cannot track properly. The Kraxen leader, a veteran named Zarkon, activated his helmet. Display. Maintain formation. Do not let the crystal effects separate the unit. The order came too late. Half the dropships vanished in mid-air. They did not explode or crash. They just stopped being there. Kim felt his stomach twist as their own ship began to flicker in and out of existence. Hold on to something. The pilot yelled. They crashed hard into what used to be a mining platform. The Kraxan warriors climbed out of the wreckage like nothing had happened. The humans took longer to get moving, but they all made it out alive. The landscape around them was wrong in ways that made Kim's head hurt. The ground was covered in crystals that reflected images of places that were not there. The sky showed 3 different suns, even though Kepler 442b only had 1 star. Gravity seemed to work sideways in some places. Where are the others? Asked Private Yoonji Soo, their communications specialist. She was trying to contact the rest of the assault force, but her equipment just made static noises. Scattered, Zarkin said. His voice sounded worried for the first time. The crystal field disrupted our landing. Dr. Choi was already examining the crystals with her scanner. These are not just minerals. They are alive somehow, and they are changing the laws of physics in this area. A sound like breaking glass echoed across the landscape. Something was moving toward them through the crystal forest. It looked like a spider made of starlight and sharp edges. Where it stepped, the ground turned into more crystals. Devourer. Scout, Zarkin said. He raised his plasma rifle. Standard formation. Concentrated fire. The Kraxan warriors spread out in a perfect combat line. Their weapons charged up with humming sounds. When the Devourer got close enough, they all fired. At once, the plasma bolts went right through the creature without touching it. The Devourer flickered like a bad hologram, then became solid again. Its crystal limbs shot out like spears, piercing through 2 Kraxan warriors before they could react. It phases between dimensions, Dr. Choi shouted. Your weapons cannot hit it when it is not solid. More Devourers appeared from behind the crystal formations. The Kraxan formation broke apart as the aliens tried to retreat. Their advanced tactics meant nothing when the enemy could become untouchable at will. Kim watched the alien warriors panic, and something clicked in his mind. He had seen this before. Different enemy, same problem. During the urban fighting on Mars, the Devourers had used similar tricks. Yoon, he called to the communications specialist. Remember what we did in the subway tunnels? Yoon's eyes lit up. The mining charges? Kim started pulling equipment from his pack. Old-style explosive charges that were meant for clearing rocks. Not fighting wars. The kind of weapons that civilized species had stopped using centuries ago. What are you doing? Zarkin demanded. He was backing away from a Devourer that kept phasing in and out of reality. Fighting dirty, Kim replied. He armed 3 charges and threw them into the crystal forest. Not at the Devourers, at the crystals themselves. The explosions were not pretty or precise. They were loud and messy and sent crystal fragments flying. Everywhere. But when the dust cleared, the Devourers were stumbling around like they were drunk. The crystals helped them phase, Dr. Choi realized. Disrupting the crystal network disrupts their abilities. Kim was already running toward the confused. Devourers with his rifle set to full automatic. Now they can bleed. The Kraxan warriors watched in amazement as the humans attacked with weapons that belonged in a museum. Kim's ancient projectile rifle punched holes in creatures that had ignored advanced plasma weapons. Yoon used her communication equipment to jam the crystal frequencies, making more Devourers solid. Dr. Choi was not a soldier, but she grabbed a medical laser and started cutting crystal formations. If we can map their network structure, we can predict where they will become vulnerable. The battle turned into chaos. Humans were running everywhere, breaking things and shooting with weapons that should not have worked. The Kraxan warriors found themselves following human tactics instead of their own training. Zarkan watched a human medic use a bone saw to cut through a devourer's leg. "This is not how warfare is supposed to work," he said to Kim. "War is not supposed to work." Kim replied while reloading his rifle. "It is supposed to be won." By the time the immediate area was clear, half the Kraxan warriors were wounded, and all of them were confused. The humans were also hurt, but they kept moving like nothing had happened. Dr. Choi was treating a Kraxan soldier who had crystal fragments in his arm. She worked quickly and efficiently, asking no questions about species or alliance politics. "Hold still. This will sting, but it will prevent infection." The wounded warrior looked at her with surprise. "You would heal an alien?" "I heal anyone who needs it," she replied. "That is what doctors do." Yoon had managed to establish contact with other scattered units using a radio system that was older than some of the aliens. "Captain Lee, this is Yoon. We have found a way to fight the Devourers." Lee's voice came through with lots of static. "Explain quickly. We are under heavy attack. Disrupt the crystals. Disrupt their phasing ability. Use explosive charges on the crystal formations, not on the creatures directly." "Understood." Broadcasting to all units. As the message spread across the assault force, the tide of battle began to change. Human tactics that seemed insane started making sense to alien commanders. Crude weapons that civilized species had abandoned proved effective against an enemy that could ignore advanced technology. Zarkan approached Kim as they prepared to move deeper into the crystal field. "I may have been wrong about humans dying quickly." Kim smiled. "We die when we choose to die, and today is not that day." The scarred Kraxan warrior nodded slowly. "Perhaps there is something to learn from your chaos." Above them, the three fake suns were setting in impossible directions. The crystal forest stretched ahead, full of dangers that would test everything they thought they knew about war. But for the first time since the Devourers arrived, the defenders were winning. The victory on Kepler 442b had felt good for exactly 12 hours. Then the intelligence reports came in, and everyone realized they had only won the first round of a much bigger fight. Commander Park So-min stood in the war room of the Nexus Eternal, looking at data that made her stomach hurt. The planet they had just liberated was not a random target. It was a staging ground. The Devourers had been using it to build something called the Final Harvest, a weapon that could eat entire star systems at once. "The device is nearly complete," reported Thyses, the ancient luminer, whose light had grown dimmer with worry. "Our analysis suggests it could consume a dozen worlds simultaneously." Captain Lai studied the holographic display showing Devourer territory. Red zones marked areas where reality itself had been changed. "How long do we have?" "Days, perhaps a week," Thyses replied. "The energy readings are increasing rapidly." Around the table, alien commanders shifted nervously. These were beings who had conquered worlds and lived for centuries, but the Devourers terrified them in ways that normal enemies did not. "I propose we withdraw," said Morden, the insectoid Zephyrite commander. His voice clicked like breaking twigs. "Gather our remaining fleets and protect the core worlds. Let the outer systems fall if necessary." Several other commanders nodded agreement. It was the smart choice, the logical choice. Save what could be saved and accept that some things were lost forever. Park looked around the room and saw fear in every face. These aliens had forgotten how to fight when the odds were impossible. They had grown comfortable with their advanced technology and careful strategies. "No," she said quietly. Every eye in the room turned to her. Morden's compound eyes glittered with annoyance. "Excuse me, human?" "I said no," Park repeated, louder this time. "We do not retreat. We attack." The room erupted in voices. Alien languages mixed together in a chaos of clicks, hisses, and electronic sounds. The translation systems could barely keep up. Silence! Vexthel's voice boomed over the noise. The scarred Kraxan had earned respect during the last battle, and the room grew quiet. Let the human speak. Park activated her datapad, and new images appeared in the hologram. The Devourers are concentrated around their construction site. Their forces are spread thin elsewhere. If we hit them now, before the weapon is complete, we can stop them. With what? Morden clicked his mandibles in frustration. Half hour. Fleet was lost on Kepler 442b. The humans showed us how to fight individual Devourers, but this is different. This is their main force. Then we do what humans do best, Mark said. We improvise. Lee moved to stand beside her. Commander Park is right. Retreating just gives them time to finish their weapon. Better to die fighting than to die running. Easy words from a species that has already lost most of their worlds. Another alien commander muttered. Dr. Choi spoke from her corner of the room. That is exactly why you should listen to us. We have nothing left to lose except everything. Park pulled up new tactical displays. Look at their behavior patterns. The Devourers are predictable in one way. They always choose the most efficient path. They do not expect desperate attacks that make no logical sense. She highlighted sections of the enemy territory. Their reality distortion fields follow mathematical patterns. If we can map those patterns, we can predict where their defenses are weakest. And then what? The eyes pulsed with skeptical light. Our most advanced weapons barely scratch them. Then we use weapons they have never seen, Park replied. Every species in this room has technology the Devourers have not encountered. We combine them in ways that should not work. Private Yoon stepped forward with her communication equipment. During the last battle, she had learned to speak with Thysis using frequency modulation. The energy beings like Thysis can interact with Devourer crystals directly. Human explosives can disrupt crystal networks. Kraxan warriors can fight in close combat while the Devourers are disrupted. What about my people? Morden asked. Zephyrites are not built for chaos, Kim Tae-wook grinned. No, but you are built for precision. While we create chaos, you can hit specific targets that we identify. For the next 6 hours, they planned something that no military academy would have taught. It was part battle plan and part controlled disaster. Human unpredictability, Kraxan strength, Zephyrite precision, and luminar energy manipulation, all working together in ways that violated every rule of proper tactics. The alien commanders looked uncomfortable with the plan, but they could not argue with results. The humans had found ways to fight an enemy that had destroyed dozens of advanced civilizations. There is something else, Dr. Choi said during a break in the planning. I have been studying Devourer biology from the samples we collected. They are not just eating matter and energy. They are eating information itself. What does that mean? Lee asked. It means they feed on complexity. Advanced civilizations with organized structures and predictable patterns are like rich food to them, but chaotic systems that change constantly. She paused. Those are harder for them to digest. Vexthel made a sound that might have been laughter. So human chaos is not just a tactic, it is a defense. More than that, Park realized, it is a weapon. The battle plan changed again. Instead of trying to match Devourer organization, they would embrace complete disorder. Units would operate independently. Communications would be scrambled. Every ship would follow different rules. This is madness, Morden protested. How can we coordinate without coordination? You do not coordinate, Kim explained. You trust your allies to do their job while you do yours. It is called faith. Faith is not a military strategy, the insectoid commander clicked. It is the only military strategy humans have ever had, Lee replied. And we are still here. As the combined fleet prepared to depart, something strange was happening. Alien crews were learning human songs to confuse Devourer sensors. Kraxen. Warriors were practicing with human-style improvised weapons. Zephyrite technicians were installing random elements into their precision systems. Dr. Choi moved between ships, teaching alien medics how to treat species they had never encountered. Pain is pain, she told them. Help is help. The biology is different, but the need is the same. Dizes visited the human ships and shared ancient knowledge about energy manipulation. Your species thinks in ways we had forgotten, the Luminar admitted. Perhaps that is why you survive where others fail. On the flagship, Hark stood with Lee looking at the star charts. Their destination was a system where reality itself was breaking down, where creatures from beyond space were building a device to consume galaxies. Are you scared? Lee asked. Terrified, Park admitted. But fear is just another thing to use as a weapon. The fleet jumped to hyperspace in a formation that looked random, but followed hidden human patterns. Behind them, the last free worlds waited to see if desperation and chaos could defeat order and inevitability. In the depths of space, the Devourers noticed the approaching fleet and began to prepare their defenses. They calculated probabilities and prepared efficient responses to likely attack patterns. They had no idea what was coming for them. A Devourer stronghold was not a place that should exist. It hung in space like a wound in reality itself, a massive structure built around a neutron star that pulsed with unnatural light. The star had been weaponized somehow, its gravity turned into a tool for consuming space and time. Captain Lee stood on the bridge of the human destroyer Defiant, watching as their fleet dropped out of hyperspace. What he saw made him understand why so many civilizations had failed before them. The Devourers had not just built defenses, they had rewritten the laws of physics in the entire system. Ships that got too close simply stopped existing. Energy. Weapons fired into the distortion field and came out as flowers or butterflies, or sometimes nothing at all. The very space around the neutron star was alive and hungry. Sensors are useless, reported the navigation officer. Distance measurements keep changing. We might be a light year away or right on top of them. Across the fleet, alien commanders were beginning to panic. The Luminar ships, which could manipulate energy itself, found their powers turned against them. The Kraxen heavy assault vessels could not fire their weapons because the targeting systems could not understand what they were looking at. This is impossible. Morden's voice came through the communication system. We cannot fight something that changes reality. Lee watched as 3 Zephyrite cruisers tried to approach the stronghold using their most advanced stealth technology. The ships vanished from sensors, then reappeared as crystal sculptures floating in space. The crews were gone, transformed into geometric patterns that hurt to look at. All ships, this is Thizes, the ancient Luminar's voice carried across the fleet. I am detecting massive energy buildup from the central structure. The final harvest device is beginning activation sequence. Park's voice cut through the growing despair. Estimated time to completion? Hours, perhaps less. The distortion field is accelerating the process. Lee felt something cold settle in his stomach. They had come so far, fought so hard, and now they were going to fail because the enemy was simply too powerful. The other alien commanders were already talking about retreat, about saving what ships they could. But then he heard Dr. Choi's voice on the medical frequency. She was talking to wounded crew members from the failed approach, people who had been rescued from the edge of the distortion field. I know it hurts, she was saying. I know everything feels wrong. But pain means you are still alive. Confusion means you are still thinking. As long as we can feel and think, we can fight. Something about her words reminded Lee of why humans had survived so long against impossible odds. They did not survive because they were the strongest or the smartest. They survived because they refused to accept that any situation was truly hopeless. All human ships, Lee announced. Remember who we are. Remember what we have lived through. Our species has survived ice ages and plagues and wars that should have destroyed us. We have always found a way. His words reached the alien vessels too, and Lee realized something important. The other species had never really faced extinction before. They had been comfortable and successful for so long that they had forgotten how to fight when everything was lost. But humans had never known comfort. They had always been one disaster away from extinction, always struggling, always adapting. That struggle had made them into something the universe had never seen before. Vexthal, Lee called to the Kraxan commander. Tell me about your peoples. Greatest victory. The scarred warrior's voice was puzzled. The conquest of the Helix Nebula. We overwhelmed the enemy with superior firepower and perfect tactics. And Morden, what about your species? The siege of Terminus Prime. We used our technological advantage to force surrender without battle. Lee nodded. Thyses, what is the Luminar's proudest moment? The creation of the Great Harmony, when we brought peace to 1,000 worlds through wisdom and energy manipulation. All of your victories came from being stronger or smarter or more advanced than your enemies, Lee realized. But what happens when you face something stronger and smarter than you are? The question hung in space, like a challenge. The alien. Commanders had no answer, because they had never needed one. Humans win differently, Lee continued. We win by refusing to lose. We win by getting back up when we are knocked down. We win by fighting with broken weapons and wounded bodies, because the only other choice is to die. Private Yoon's voice came over the communication system. Captain, I am picking up something strange. The distortion field is not completely random. There are patterns, but they are not mathematical patterns. They are emotional patterns. Explain, Park ordered. The devourers feed on order and logic, right? But what if we feed them something they cannot digest? What if we broadcast pure human emotion into their network? Dr. Choi understood immediately. Emotional chaos. Love and hate and fear and hope. All mixed together. It would be like poison to them. But how do we weaponize emotions? Morden asked. Kim's laughter came through the speakers. Are you serious? Have you seen how humans fight? We have been weaponizing emotions for our entire history. The plan that formed was insane even by human standards. Instead of trying to destroy the devourer stronghold, they would contaminate. Every human ship would broadcast their emotions directly into the distortion field. Not just the clean, organized emotions that advanced civilizations had learned to control, but raw human feelings in all their chaotic glory. Fear of death mixed with love of family. Anger at injustice combined with hope for the future. The desperate. Courage that comes from having nothing left to lose, and the fierce joy of fighting alongside friends. This will not work, Thyses warned. The energy requirements alone will burn out our systems, Lee finished. Probably kill half of us in the process. But if we do nothing, we all die anyway. One by one, the alien commanders agreed to the plan. Not because they believed it would work, but because they had learned something from watching humans fight. Sometimes the only choice was between certain death and impossible hope. The broadcast began with a single, human voice singing an old song about never giving up. More voices joined in, humans from dozens of worlds sharing their memories and emotions. Across space, they sang about home and loss and the refusal to surrender. The effect on the distortion field was immediate. The smooth patterns of reality warping began to stutter and break. The devourers, who fed on order and predictability, found themselves choking on chaos they could not understand or control. It is working, Thyses reported with wonder in their voice. The field is destabilizing, but the cost was brutal. Human ships began to lose power as their crews poured their life force into the broadcast. People collapsed at their stations, pushed beyond their limits by the effort of sharing their souls with the universe. Dr. Choi's voice came through weakly. Keep going. Do not stop. Make them taste what it means to be human. In the heart of the distortion field, something ancient and hungry began to understand fear for the first time in its existence. The Devourer stronghold was screaming God. It was not a sound that ears could hear, but every person in the fleet felt it in their bones. The ancient hunger that had consumed galaxies was experiencing something it had never known: indigestion. The pure human emotions flooding its network were like acid in its crystalline veins. Captain Lee collapsed in his command chair as the emotional broadcast drained his strength, but he kept singing. Around him, his crew did the same. On every human ship, people pushed themselves beyond their limits, sharing their humanity with creatures that had never learned what it meant to be mortal. The distortion field around the neutron star began to break apart in spectacular ways. Parts of space turned into waterfalls. Gravity began flowing in spirals of visible light. The laws of physics, twisted by Devourer technology, snapped back toward normal in violent waves. The field is collapsing. Dyes reported. The ancient Luminar's light was brighter than it had been in centuries, fed by the emotional energy that the humans were pouring into space. But the final harvest device is still active. It is drawing power from the neutron star itself. Through the chaos, Lee could see the weapon clearly for the first time. It was beautiful and terrible, a web of crystalline structures that wrapped around the neutron star like a cage. Energy flowed through the crystal veins in patterns that made reality bend and twist. At the center, something was forming that would soon reach out and devour entire star systems. All ships, final assault, Lee managed to say. His voice was weak, but it carried across the fleet. Everything we have, everything we are. What happened next was not a battle in any traditional sense. It was chaos given form and purpose. Human ships, their systems failing from the emotional broadcast, crashed into Devourer structures while still singing. Kraxan warriors, inspired by human courage, charged crystal formations that should have been impregnable. Zephyrite precision strikes hit targets that their computers said did not exist. Sergeant Kim, his heavy weapons useless against reality-warping enemies, armed mining charges, and launched himself in a boarding pod toward the central structure. "If we are going to die," he transmitted, "let us die making noise." The explosion when he hit the crystal web was small compared to the weapons being fired around him. But it was precisely placed, and it was done with human stubbornness rather than alien logic. The crystal network had been designed to handle overwhelming force and sophisticated attacks. It had no defense against a man with explosives who simply refused to accept that his target was too strong. The crack in the network spread like lightning through glass. More human teams followed Kim's example, using crude weapons and desperate tactics to exploit the weakness he had created. They died in large numbers, but each death damaged the Devourer structure in ways that should have been impossible. Dr. Choi, operating from a medical ship that was coming apart around her, made a discovery that changed everything. The Devourers are not just eating matter and energy, she broadcast to the fleet. They are eating the information that defines reality itself. But human emotions are not information. They are experience. Pure, chaotic, impossible experience. Commander Park, her tactical displays showing impossible readings, understood immediately. They cannot process us. We are not food. We are poison. The realization spread through the fleet like wildfire. The aliens, who had always defined themselves by their achievements and their order, began to embrace the chaos that humans had. taught them. Vexthul abandoned his careful combat formations and led his warriors in a charge that followed no rules, except the human rule of never giving up. Morden's precise ships began firing randomly, creating patterns that no enemy could predict. At the heart of the battle, something unprecedented was happening. The Devourers, creatures that had existed since the universe was young, were learning what it meant to be confused. The final harvest device, designed to consume galaxies with mathematical precision, was choking on the irrational defiance of mortals who refused to be eaten. Thizes, drawing power from human emotions, reached out with energy manipulation abilities that they had not used in millennia. "I can feel them," the Luminer reported. "They are ... afraid. For the first time in their existence, they know fear." Private Yoon, her communication equipment jury-rigged with spare parts and stubborn hope, managed to establish contact with the Devourer network itself. What she heard made her understand why humanity had survived when so many others had failed. "They do not understand us," she transmitted. "They have eaten 1,000 civilizations, but all of those civilizations had reached some kind of peak. Some golden age where they thought they had figured out how the universe worked. But humans ... We never had a golden age. We are still fighting, still struggling, still growing." The revelation hit the fleet like a shockwave. The Devourers fed on civilizations that had become static, predictable, finished. But humanity was unfinished. Humanity was still becoming whatever it was going to be. There was nothing there for the Devourers to eat, because humans were not done cooking yet. The final harvest device, faced with prey that refused to be consumed, began to tear itself apart. The crystalline structures that wrapped around the neutron star started to fracture. Reality, which had been twisted into impossible shapes, began to snap back towards something approaching normal. Captain Lee, barely conscious in his command chair, watched as Devourer ships throughout the system began to flicker and fade. They, creatures that had seemed invincible just hours before, were retreating into whatever dimension they had come from, fleeing from an enemy they could not understand or defeat. "Are they dead?" Vexthul asked. His voice carried wonder and exhaustion in equal measure. "No," Dr. Choi replied. She was treating wounded crew members from a dozen different species, working with medical equipment that had been improvised from spare parts, but they are afraid. And fear is something they will have to live with now. The neutron star, freed from its crystalline cage, began to pulse with normal light again. Around it, the combined fleet floated in space that followed recognizable laws of physics. They had lost over half their ships and thousands of crew members, but they had won something that no one had thought possible. They had taught the universe's ultimate predators that some prey fights back. In the aftermath, as rescue operations began and the wounded were treated, the aliens found themselves looking at their human allies with new eyes. These were not the primitive creatures they had dismissed. These were beings who had turned their own incompleteness into a weapon. "Your species is strange," Morden admitted to Lee as they coordinated the recovery efforts. "You fight like you. Have nothing to lose and everything to gain." "Because we do," Lee replied. "We lost our golden age before we ever had one. Every day we survive is a victory." Thizes, their light now warm instead of cold, pulsed with something that might have been laughter. Perhaps that is the secret. Perhaps survival is not about reaching perfection, but about refusing to stop trying. As the fleet prepared to return home, carrying news of a victory that should have been impossible, Kim's voice came over the communication system from a rescue pod. "Next time we fight impossible odds," he said, "remind me to bring bigger explosives." The laughter that followed echoed across dozens of species and hundreds of ships. It was the sound of beings who had learned something important about the universe and about themselves. Sometimes the best weapon against an enemy that cannot be defeated is the simple refusal to be beaten. Sometimes chaos is stronger than order. And sometimes the greatest strength comes not from what you have achieved, but from what you refuse to give up. The devourers would return eventually. They always did. But when they came back, they would face a galaxy that had learned to fight like humans, with stubborn hope and chaotic courage, and the absolute certainty that surrender was never an option. The universe was about to become a much more interesting place.